Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of R3C Live, where we will be continuing our conversation on the topic of executive optimization. Today, we will be going further on that conversation that we started a few weeks ago to share some valuable insights and tips for you to consider when building a behavioral health and performance program for your executives and top leaders. First off, we're honored to have a special guest with us today, Dr. Deborah Miscoll, Managing Director, Consulting Psychologist with Deloitte. Deborah leads mental health initiatives for executive leadership and confers broadly across the U.S. firm on complex mental health issues and their management. Along with firm leadership, she is in the process of designing a transformative approach to serving Deloitte professionals and their mental health needs. She has over 15 years of experience consulting on behavioral health in the workplace and has been innovating programs to support Deloitte's top executives for the past 7 years. Before that, she enjoyed a career in forensic and criminal psychology with the U.S. Department of Justice. So thank you so much for joining us today, Deborah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Also joining us today is Dr. George Bergolius, Medical Director at R3 Continuum.
Hello.
And
Glad to be here.
Thanks, George. And Amanda Rosowski, R3 Continuum's Clinical Director of Executive Optimization.
Hi, everyone.
So just a big thank you for all of our experts on our panel today and sharing in our discussion. So just to kind of review what we discussed in our last webinar, we explored the powerful link between executive behavioral health and individual and organizational performance. We learned that without a doubt, thriving leaders propel thriving companies, and that naturally challenges such as depression, burnout, or substance use can impair personal well-being and the ability to effectively lead. Together, we then explored some of the barriers that stand in the way of executives getting support and how to confidentially and professionally address those barriers. So for today's discussion, just kind of wanted to reflect back on the poll that we took in our last session. We were able to confirm that the concerns shown in a wider research also were prevalent within our own research on that polling question with the burnout, behavioral health, and other performance issues that are taking place within the organizations when behavioral health is not being taken care of. The looming question is, what can be done about it? So today we'll dig deeper into a real-life executive scenario, then explore practical how-tos of building a tailored executive behavioral health and performance program in your organization. All right, so George, as a psychologist, can you share specific examples of what's at stake if executive behavioral health is compromised?
Certainly, and thanks for the question, Jamie. I'm going to start with a case we probably are all well aware of, and that's Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX. So he's a really interesting example. Here's a guy who's by all measures a genius, a visionary, a very wealthy and high-level entrepreneur, and a mogul and mentor to many, many in the industry, in the tech industry and so on. But what's interesting, he's got kind of a history as well. I mean, he has a history of being candid about behavioral health struggles in his own past. He's been rather open about those across a number of interviews. And along with that, he's also exhibited a number of behaviors of concern or strange behaviors, at times being too open or too candid on Twitter and other social media platforms, at times making statements concerning to his investors and to his stakeholders, and at times resulting in significant plummets of Tesla stock value. And at one point, the SEC filed suit against Elon for issuing false and misleading statements and for failing to properly notify regulators of specific company events and developments and material events and developments. And at one point, a couple of years back, the stock tumbled 14 points or 14% in a single day. That's damaging. And that kind of impulsivity and poor judgment is damaging to him, his reputation, his company, and to his stakeholders, to his stock investors. At one point, many of us have seen this. He went on the Joe Rogan podcast, an extremely popular podcast, and he allegedly smoked marijuana on video. You can pull it up on YouTube if you really want to watch that. And although I am a fan of the Joe Rogan podcast, I will say that that was a pretty odd thing to see. And there was some significant fallout as a result of that behavior. And at one point, he later, in not an op-ed piece, but a article interview for the New York Times, he talked about the impact of stress and burnout on his life, and in particular on his business life, which for Elon was mostly all his life. He claimed that he worked up to 120 hours a week. He reported that he had not more than 1 week off since he began work in 2001, and that quite often he will sleep in his office. And at times use sleeping pills to just gather a few hours of sleep before going back to work the next day. So the question for us with him is, what is the impact? What's the behavioral, psychological, social, and performance impact of carrying all of that in terms of breaking down one's judgment, one's impulse control, one's decision making? And when you are on top of a corporation, as he is, that is so dependent on having a perspective of strength and confidence and togetherness, if you will, from a behavioral psychological angle, that can be very damaging. But he's not an outlier. Elon Musk is not an outlier. He's not the only one that we see here. There's a number of other CEOs and top leaders of major companies that have stepped down. They've had emotional breakdowns. They've suffered a number of physical health issues or crises, and in some cases died by suicide in response to a stressful life and a series of stressful events. Just a couple to name real quickly. Antonio Hort Osario, CEO of Lloyd's Banking Group. He had a highly public leave of absence due to burnout and exhaustion. He took a 2-month leave, and during that time, the shares for the bank dropped 4.5%, which was roughly a 12 billion British pound loss to the market. Jane, and it's not just gender, it's not just males, by the way. Jane Ann Gadia, CEO of Virgin Money, she openly talked about various struggles that she has had with postpartum depression. But she admitted that, or she reported that if she admitted that openly at the time that she was in those positions, her colleagues would have felt weak-minded of her, not to mention her stakeholders and her investors. And then lastly, not very long ago, about 7 years ago in 2013, we saw 2 prominent suicides. Pierre Wautier, CFO of Zurich Insurance, and Carsten Schlosser, CEO of Swisscom, both killed themselves. These were unrelated to one another, but still, in the same year, the pressures and the burnout and the high stakes involved took a significant toll. So what can we learn from these case examples, and how can we begin to fashion a perspective forward to both understand these issues, build cultures of inclusivity and availability for proper resources, and help executives really be able to get the supports and help that they may need to combat these issues? So that's what we're going to be talking today. I think Amanda is going to take us a little deeper into some of that discussion.
Yes, I just wanted to carry the thread through from last time. In the example that you were just talking about, George, we see some of those traditional challenges that executives have in their impact. The excessively long work days, 18 plus hours, and working on weekends, poor sleep hygiene. Elon, discussed sleeping at work and overuse of sleeping aids like sleeping pills, the excessive work demand infringing on personal time with no vacation since 2001, and obviously questionable decision-making, choosing to smoke pot on camera and mocking the FCC on Twitter. I believe that sometimes the expectation versus the actual reality of these high-status roles is a challenge in and of itself, because I think executives tend to glorify these extremes as quote-unquote crushing it, which is not sustainable, and it's not attentive to the overall well-being or guarding them against burnout. Working crazy hours is a status symbol for executives, and it's almost like the entrepreneurial badge of honor. And I think a lot of times they're trying to live up to their own perceived mental constructs about what others expect of them while working endlessly towards unachievable and unsustainable standards. And remember, they're only human like the rest of us, so this trajectory is really a recipe for risk.
So what could have mitigated or helped in the instance of Elon Musk?
So this is Deborah, and I'm gonna agree and disagree just a little bit, or maybe share some perspective I have in terms of the CEO culture. A little bit of a deviation from your point, Amanda. I think one thought off the top of my head and my experience here, and take it with a grain of salt, but I think that there are some folks within the culture who crush it, have that personality to thrive in the grind, if you will, in a sustained way. I'm not saying there's not any risk associated with that, but I think this is kind of in some people's wheelhouse. They just live for it, and they don't seem too worse for the wear. It's not to say that the risk isn't present, though. But for those who do experience a challenge in that style of work, as you mentioned, the culture is tough to break through, and it really can be a double-edged sword. And I don't think there are any easy answers for it. I think there is some reality to the fact that executives feel as if they have a target on their back, and it can be difficult for them to remove for the reasons that George talked about, even as if we are developing more emphasis on well-being these days to include efforts in cultivating strong emotional health. I think that expressing vulnerability still can provoke a lack of confidence, as we've seen in some of these examples. I think it's a fight that we're fighting every day, and I think there persists some type of nuance regarding health and well-being that implies there's some type of exemption at the level of executive leadership, as if these leaders exist within some rarefied atmosphere where things like the experience of distress or mental illness don't happen. Now, on the other hand, we're seeing more normalizing of the experience of emotional health issues, and that increases the relatability between leader and employee, lowers stigma, reduces fear, and perhaps encourages help seeking from the top down. But it's a bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't in that type of scenario. And I think that leaders are sort of stuck in the middle of this conflict, because at the end of the day, there could be impact. Either you're not relatable to your workers, or there could be business consequences if you show that vulnerability. I'd say that the latter point of view is becoming more and more socialized at the executive level, but I would still say there exists a culture of secrecy, sort of damage control perspective in mental health if it happens to bubble up with an executive. So you might continue to see a retreat from showcasing executive vulnerability, and while you might be able to chip away at that frame of reference, at this point it's pretty firm. Now, does that mean you don't continue to try and chip away and make progress? Absolutely not. I think it's part of any mental health strategy. It's a responsibility to call it out, persist in making a business case that the alternative of mental health issues, sort of left unchecked, can impact executive mental health, provoke risk, impact the bottom line in ways that can be far-reaching. Now, because that's the frame of reference that's often in play, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I think you have to consider working with it as opposed to blatantly against it in terms of how we start to address this issue. Back to your earlier point, one option is to cultivate executive buy-in with solutions and interventions that promote psychological fitness and resilience within a peak performance perspective that seems to permeate these high-performance competitive cultures, and where excellence is demanded, but you sort of sneak in the back door with these psych fitness and resilience tactics that we know, guess what, also prevent and mitigate the emergence of mental illness. So in short, we're sort of shoring up the mental health, using an approach that might be better tolerated for executive leadership at this time, and that doesn't raise the defensiveness. But that said, I don't think that you abandon a push against the culture or give up in terms of building explicit awareness around the experience of mental illness and this sort of band of leadership. I think you continue to work to innovate and create a safe environment for them to test the help seeking with expert professionals who understand this space. Jamie?
Yeah, Jamie, if I could add in, I really like what Deborah just shared, and she highlights very well the conflicts that executives and top leaders can have, and in some degree developing their own personal insight for all the reasons Deborah clarified. Or if it is developed, how do they openly admit that in the cultures that they're operating within, right? And then put it into some kind of action for change and improvement. I want to highlight another barrier that we often see at the C-suite level, and in particular, we've seen it with Elon Musk, and that is that, high energy leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries, often find themselves needing to make rapid game time decisions. They don't have the luxury of always gaining or seeking democratic agreement on every decision, right? Ultimately, these people are deciders, and that is the role that they hold. And there's a reason they hold that role. There's a reason that they're given charge of such decision-making and power. And one of the difficulties we see is that, deciders, if I could use that term, that have power and have vision, they often surround themselves with people that have a yes mindset, whether that's what the leader wants or whether it's intentional or not. They do sometimes, quite often, will bump into that. And these assistants, call them assistants, you can call them handlers or subordinates, people that are receiving mentoring or supervision or management by this level of leadership. They're kind of in the same competitive grind that Deborah just spoke about. It's what I refer to sometimes as a sort of executive Game of Thrones or an executive Hunger Games, right? And I know that sounds, it's a particularly negative spin on it, but they're in the thick of it themselves, trying to navigate that. And so they will often struggle with the question of, do I point out to my boss that he or she is starting to struggle, or that it's impacting their judgment or their performance, or that I'm concerned about them, or that I think they might need some help or assistance, right? That's a really sticky predicament to navigate. And we have seen this struggle time and again, and not only in the corporate C-suite, but we've certainly seen it with presidents, right? I mean, pick up any presidential biography and you'll get a litany of people who will say that, this was the president that was open to feedback from their cabinet, and you'll have other presidents you'll read about where you had to be very, very delicate with how you brought up certain things. So the irony is that dance, if you will, often develops where executives and top leaders end up being isolated from genuine, honest feedback from the very people who are in the best position to offer that guidance, right? So as Elon Musk was kind of slipping, right, and excessively sleeping, and then getting on the roundabout of using sleeping pills, and then working 20 hours a day, and then, maybe using drugs and making bad judgments, how do you get them off that treadmill, right? So the problem with so many of these leaders is they kind of, they create a situation where there's no kind of self-correction feedback loop, either because they're not open to it, or if they are open to it, others around them fear that if they bring it up and it goes south or it's taken negatively, then they're committing career suicide. So in essence, they create kind of an imprisoning tower that they're living in, but one in which it locks from the inside, because they need to have the ability to unlock that key and to kind of create a culture in which they can receive feedback and do their own kind of self-correction and self-checks. So our goal, when we talk about the services and the approach that we're addressing here, is to help them find that key, right, to unlock that prison, and empowering them to accept and embrace whatever struggles may be holding them back, and then, lean in, right, to use that term, lean in to those issues and those struggles to co-create solutions for transcendence beyond what those barriers are. And when you can do that in a way, as Deborah was suggesting a minute ago, and address it to help set that up and set up a culture that allows that, it can be a really transformative process all the way from the C-suite on down.
Great. Thank you, George. So in our last episode of R3C Live, where we were discussing executive optimization, we asked you in that polling question about the personal impact on executives in your organizations. And the data reflected a clear and recognizable impact, particularly around burnout, behavioral health, and performance issues like we showed before in this presentation. So for the audience, what I'm wondering is, what do you have in place at your organizations to address these challenges? So I'm going to put a polling question up there, and we want to hear from you in terms of where you see your current executive well-being initiatives are at in the organization. So we'll give a little bit of time here for the audience to respond to the polling question. Okay, so let's take a look here and see if we got some response. There we go. Okay, so it looks like physical health focused programming is quite popular, along with employee assistance programming. followed by behavioral health awareness and educational training, medical benefits. Great. So from our panel, any comments in terms of what we're seeing in the for the initiatives? Are these pretty common to what you've seen in the work that you've done around executive optimization?
I would say so. It's not surprising.
Great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide here.
Agreed.
So for the panel, when you identify that there are gaps to fill in your executive well-being initiatives, when it comes to building an executive behavioral health and performance program, where do you recommend people start?
This is Amanda. I would say for our methodology, at least, it begins with discovery and a really comprehensive needs assessment. It's a really collaborative process where client partners together examine what the career life cycle of an executive at that particular organization looks like. And you're considering the cultural nuances of your specific organization and identifying where the largest challenges lie. And then together you're co-creating a tailored solution that supports your executives during those critical moments when you're anticipating their struggle. So you're proactively building in resilience. And then you really have to design and deliver on that experience. And I believe for this population, it's really important that it's high touch, it's responsive, it's confidential, and there's an ease of accessibility that matches their lifestyle demand. And finally, I think ideally you would have a feedback and refinement process in place. If you think about how you're measuring success, I think in this instance that I've seen from my experience, it's the vendor-client partnership where the magic lies. And ideally, there's a continual feedback loop and refinement process in place where your ability to find a vendor partner who will stay nimble and be fluid and responsive and innovate to meet on-demand needs, while then taking all of the information that they're learning over the course of time and integrating that into refining the program design over time is really crucial to success for executive level programming.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So to continue on that, what are some of the most important considerations that should be taken?
I think like Deborah said earlier, it has to start at the top, and we touched on that briefly last time as well, about leadership really making a commitment to shift the overall culture to one of well-being and safety and inclusion, and that has to start at the top. Visibility of executive behavioral health and performance programming can go a really long way toward creating a culture of comprehensive well-being and inclusion throughout the organization. Because I think while individuals can have an impact on culture, the fundamental changes that are going to make a healthier, more inclusive workplace are handed down from the C-suite. And I think it's important to consider that culture really can be your secret competitive advantage. So executives need to be sort of living that and promoting it, making it visible and being vocal, modeling vulnerability and disclosure from the top as a strength and not a weakness. Programming should be promoted in a way so that it's visible to the organization. While they don't have to be aware of who is actually accessing that programming, just the simple aspect of having it visible can have a positive impact on overall culture. It communicates that if it's okay for the best of the best to access support, it's okay for them to do so as well. And it's that sort of normalization over time that slowly moves the competitive advantage. When we see the data, there is an undeniable link between well-being and individual and business performance, which means that you have to make that investment and allocate funds towards strategic behavioral health programming that in the end optimizes executive performance and overall business performance.
Hey, Amanda, can I add a comment to that?
Absolutely.
So one of the things, all the right reasons, absolutely. Need for something like this is appealing to the business case, right? And I think one of the things that's been a topic of conversation lately is that the organizational responsibility landscape is changing, and organizations are being held more and more responsible for things that are going on in their organization from the point of behavioral health, mental illness, all the way across the continuum to how you detect and intervene upon concerning behavior. So discussing is part of it, but also something that's relatable to your leadership team is risk mitigation and also making the business case. We learned a long time ago that one of the things that flew with our leadership was how are we reducing risk to our population, and also how are we protecting our talent assets. And we learned real early that if we lose an executive, in our case, partners, principals, managing directors, to mental illness, it's a massive I think as much as we may not want to, and we want to do it for the more altruistic reasons, I think if you speak the language of the business in terms of profit, performance, risk, you can get a lot of runway with making a business case in addition to, I don't like doing it, but in some cases it's necessary because we just want to do the right thing, but making a business case can help. George?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. And I think what's interesting about what you said and what Amanda said before is the way you kind of bring those together. Something ranked and then balancing out the things that you're talking about just a second ago, Deborah, really is kind of the way you go about doing that in a way that's sustainable over time. What's interesting to me, another element here is if you want to take all the good work you've done implementing what Deborah just talked about and what Amanda just talked about, and if you want to throw it into the garbage, have a lack of confidentiality, right? So what I'm saying clearly for the audience, this is what not to do, right? You don't want to have a lack of trust in the organization in terms of how these issues are going to be handled, right? So the key is that when we talk about the individuals that we're talking about and the stressors that are upon them, and our desire for them to have the insight and then the ability to seek help, it really requires an executive to embrace vulnerability. And as Amanda mentioned earlier, executives face a ton of public scrutiny, and their roles are isolating by nature, right? They are in that tower that I said earlier, that they're kind of imprisoned in quite often, or at least they can perceive that. And they have to work really hard to not feel that way. So most executives who are struggling to openly express what they're going through or what they're struggling with, they have a certain executive presence and image that they need to portray. And if they fail to portray that, literally, they lose money. Their investors lose money. They have to lay people off who lose their livelihoods. And that impacts people at home and impacts families, right? So as I touched on this earlier just a bit, one of the preliminary recommendations that we make to clients would be to implement an anonymous support line where executives can reach out for an initial support or education or guidance about a given problem that they're dealing with, or that even perhaps the family member's dealing with. What this does is it starts the conversation in a safe, confidential way, and it allows them to begin to feel vulnerability. And the difficulty with beginning to feel vulnerable is if that's not your mainstay. If you work in an environment where showing any sign of weakness any sign of vulnerability is perceived as a sign of weakness, where others attack and look to exploit that, be it your competition, be it other people that might be gunning for your position, whatever it may be, it's hard to break that cycle. And so what this anonymous support line can do is it can start the conversation and it can begin to build trust. And that eases the executive's comfortability in initially reaching out for help. So another recommendation is to utilize a trusted expert third-party vendor or partner to deliver the consultation and coaching. What this does is it creates kind of an outside, non-judgmental advisor and somebody that doesn't have necessarily an internal agenda or motivation because they're outside the organization, right? And they become kind of a support and a sounding board for that individual that isn't tied into career objectives or hidden agendas that are built in to whatever corporate politics might be going on. It creates kind of a cleaner approach. With that, executives can feel more comfortable discussing challenging organizational issues with less fear that this is going to get out or be used against them in some other way. And they benefit from kind of an outside objective perspective from a coach that has also consulted with and coached other executives from other industries or other businesses. That can be very, very powerful.
I would also add to that, George. Thank you. Additionally, with our clients, we've implemented systems where we use specific billing and triage protocols that allow our clients to track utilization, but also keep the identity of each individual accessing services protected. Of course, there's going to be instances when I'm working closely with a referrer or that they've, self-identified or have been referred for a particular concern. But for the majority of cases, we have avenues in place where executives can contact us directly as the vendor, and we're able to protect their information while still providing overall utilization metrics to the client, which is really ideal for everyone involved. We're able to sort of assuage their concerns by telling them exactly what information is going to be shared back with their organization and in what manner, and also sort of take the opportunity to educate them on the limitations of that privacy and what instances it would, potentially be broken.
And another related issue to that, I just want to add to that, Amanda, it's a great point, is that ease of access, right? Ease of access is crucial. These are extremely busy individuals that are juggling a lot of things in the air at once with pressures that not only come in every day, but many that are sustained and ongoing. And so the ability to access this support in a timely manner where the access itself isn't a barrier is critical. It's critical. They have, these are folks that travel extensively globally, elevated work demand, irregular schedules where they're dealing with multiple time zones around the world, or they're dealing with emails or other events happening at all hours of the clock. All of these alone are barriers for executives accessing traditional channels of support, not to mention the current lag time in requesting behavioral health issues that are certainly occurring in the continuous U.S. Can you imagine an executive that is flying to Dubai and then on to Australia and then has to be back in 3 days for a meeting in England, who calls up a local therapist and says, yeah, can you see me in my office on Tuesday at 3:00? That is not going to work for somebody that is at that level, traveling and basically working, at those off hours where they're always on and they never know exactly where they're going to be. They're going to need easy access and a more nimble approach. And we need to work to get rid of that barrier in particular.
Right. I'll just add just a couple quick points about that. I totally agree, George and Amanda, that understanding the role and responsibilities of your executives and how they work is critical in designing solutions that meet those unique needs is a deal breaker. If we're not in the zone with it, if we're not attentive to that frame of reference, it can crush your programming. We, in fact, distinguish ourselves with support availability on their terms, on their schedule, using a much more intensely customized hybrid leader support model. And I'm going to deviate one quick second to a point that you made a little bit earlier about having the outside consultant base, having a layer of independence and separation between who's fielding the services and who's receiving them. We've chosen this hybrid model because for us, I actually have an internal role, and you would think there might be a little skittishness about that, kind of big brother-ish, what kind of, confidentiality, what kind of impact do I have as an internal psychologist in this firm? But it's not what you would think. In fact, our culture is so about the owner mindset, the partnership, it's got a real family feel, and I'm part of the family, so I have some instant street cred, if you will. But how I serve those folks in terms of our solutions, technologies, interventions are that one layer removed. But I have a very unique role as an internal person that works super well because I immediately have trust because I'm part of the family. So that works for us. So we've got this sort of hybrid model going. And of course, ease of logistics and support navigation is very, very important, or my people will not access. It's very black and white, and if you have a swing and a miss, the reputation and the trusted partnership that you may have had, they won't be back, and you get one shot. And if you call us Deloitte and you don't know who we are and how we work, you've just lost your program. We sort of learned outdated EAP models, completely outsourced support, really wasn't solving our pain points. And this hybrid model with a strong strategic partnership with a vendor partner was more effective in addressing our unique culture and our unique needs. We learned that your typical face-to-face support opportunities, to George's point, just don't work. They're not viable because of how our executive class works. So in cases where an alternative is possible, virtual support, telephonic, secure video conferencing, email, text support are highly utilized almost exclusively. Now, core solutions and technologies are well established, and the range of programming is represented to invite the clients in. That said, who is on the other end of that interaction is vital. And we have really focused on cultivating a cadre of experts, what we consider, frankly, and believe are much upgraded in terms of what you typically see in the EAP market. Now, of course, if the situation ever demands a higher level of care, we have a system to get those conditions assessed and recommendations fulfilled. We have a concierge treatment navigation consultation and firm-initiated intervention strategy. We pull from relationships we have. In fact, that's a big part of what we do is building relationships and cultivating them all across the U.S. with established clinicians, examiners, centers of excellence all over the country to expedite care. We are very involved, probably more involved than you would ever see in terms of how intently focused we are on the client experience, working tirelessly 24/7 to tell the need is met, the client satisfied, the firm action resolved. And we do this with a nod to that hybrid model with an invested internal component, but an unusually close-knit relationship with our strategic partner. Amanda.
Thank you, Deborah. That level of responsiveness, I think, is equally as crucial as the level of expertise they have. I think frequently, as you guys have just mentioned, when executives are trying to use those traditional channels of support, the immediacy of the response and the quality of the support falls short, or it can, as I mentioned last time, fail to meet sort of ongoing needs. Our program is extremely high touch. We make our clients a top priority, and we offer a commitment with regard to our response times and our quality assurance. We have a really close working relationship with our client partners, and we're consistently adjusting to in-the-moment demands that arise. We try to take a nimble approach, and I believe our clients know that we're willing and able to meet any challenge that is presented, and we're willing to innovate to co-create a solution that works for everyone, because each organization has its own unique needs, and we don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think that's also a crucial piece.
Yep, sorry to cut you off there, man. But I was just going to say I totally agree, and not to mention executives aren't they're not in this alone. They're not shouldering these challenges of work-life balance alone. Right? They have families and loved ones. They might have aging parents that need caretaking, special needs, siblings or children, whatever it may be, right? They actually work a lot, but they still do have a life outside of work. If there are challenges at home or in their personal lives, executives quite often may be struggling to find the bandwidth to effectively manage those challenges, in addition to the demands of their role, right? So that's why it's essential for organizations to choose a vendor who can truly partner on those efforts, and that will go the extra mile and offer concierge top-tier level referrals for family and loved ones of an executive, not only the executive, because your organization doesn't have to foot the bill for the treatment of those ancillary individuals, but taking the hassle and the frustration out of researching and vetting appropriate treatment providers in their communities really is taking a huge burden off their plate. and it is perceived as a huge support and a big relief for those executives that are involved trying to navigate that personal crisis amidst dealing with all the high-level stress issues that they're dealing with at work. And it becomes a relief for them and for all involved.
Yeah, I think that the quality of provider issue is kind of where the rubber meets the road. I'm not going to lie, I've been in this industry a long time, and things like that we're talking about, access, responsiveness, quality of providers, I feel is sometimes lacking. And without a doubt, we as a firm earn the business of our senior leaders using a concierge approach in terms of accessibility, responsiveness, and the use of a reserved panel of upgraded expert consultants who accommodate the convenience needs of our leaders and their families. In fact, I will say unequivocally that it is the quality of our professionals who are experienced, nimble, have the confidence to withstand the executive persona, and who understand our culture, the roles, responsibilities of our leaders that make our program successful. One miss on that, and I'd like to say I don't miss on this. In fact, we haven't missed in the entire time that we've been working with our strategic partner and our folks. We've chosen to invest in a high-quality panel of reserved experts, and it shows in our outcomes and the utilization of our program and the trust that we've earned within the organization. Our level of involvement in who serves our people is pretty unusual, I think. We have a very strong opinion on who we think should be on the other end of that consultation or that engagement or that interaction in just terms of who we need to serve our people. And we expect to work very, very closely with the strategic partner housing our consultant base. We work together to recruit, and I have a big role in that, equal level of influence, I would say, with our vendor partner to recruit the best in terms of a reserve consultant group that serves some internal programming needs, but also in terms of to whom we refer if there's a high level of care needed. Our expectations are very high. We don't settle, and our diverse panel is defined by the highest level of education, expertise, range of experience, et cetera. Outcomes are defined by the quality of support on the other end. We can't cheap it out. We can't farm it out. We know our culture better than anybody, and we're going to work tirelessly to make sure that we have the right people on the other end of that. And we are invested both culturally and financially in making sure we have the best of the best. George?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. It's interesting. Deborah was just talking about vetting carefully and the quality and ensuring quality throughput. And it makes me think of a question, and that is, what if any of us built the world's best possible program and nobody came to use it, right? So the flip side to having all of those good expectations and well-vetted providers, which is critical, and Deborah just elucidated that very well, you have to get buy-in, right? You have to promote behavioral health awareness, and you have to promote the program so that people actually use it. And that's where the magic kind of happens, is when you've got the quality of those providers that Deborah's talking about meeting the individual executives in those groups who are willing to embrace the vulnerability enough to seek support and seek help. So prevention and early intervention are imperative when it comes to behavioral health issues. We often will say, you want to hit low to avoid high. You want to hit a problem early, and when it's a low-grade problem, otherwise you're doing Herculean efforts to deal with it by the time it gets to Elon Musk having a meltdown and smoking marijuana on the Joe Rogan show, right? Or your CEO commits suicide, right? We do not want to be dealing with those problems. We want to be dealing with them upstream. So if you can teach executives to self-monitor, right, and recognize when symptoms arise, as well as creating cultures where the closest people to those executives feel that they have the openness to address a concern that they're noticing, right? What I mentioned earlier. When you have those in place, you have the opportunity to facilitate proper linkage to available resources sooner and more upstream. And by doing that, then you're going to prevent potential behavioral health crises in the future. So increasing behavioral health literacy and awareness with customized behavioral health training choosing a vendor partner who will tailor their specific training to your culture. So they not only understand, as Deborah joked a bit ago, how to pronounce, your name, Deloitte, not Deloitte, right? It's a good point though. But also understanding what is the nuances, right? What are the unique factors? How does the culture view itself in this particular client versus another one? What are the buzzwords? What are the values of that company? These are critical pieces of information to build into the approach and the training and even the marketing materials that sell the program. Otherwise, you're just not going to get buy-in. So having all of those that are catered specific to your cultural nuances and target population are very important considerations as well.
Yeah, George, we here at the firm, we've sort of taken that to heart in terms of, promoting awareness in a couple of unique ways, but we're really targeting our leader population to own it. We know, as we've been talking about throughout this entire presentation, that, the executive band is dedicating energies to the business, sometimes to the exclusion of well-being needs, particularly strong mental health, which remains a touchy subject. That's why it's important to promote it and develop literacy around executive mental health. And we have taken that on. In fact, the promotion of mental health awareness and compassionate support for those experiencing a mental illness is a firm priority. Just generally, it's emphasized strongly as an important part of executive leadership and leader presence, though. We're really wanting them to take ownership and accountability for that as a equally important responsibility. It's not just about numbers and profit margins. More specifically, our leaders are exposed to general concepts about overall well-being. They elevate their awareness that health and well-being not only encourages better health, of course, but also performance and reducing organizational risk. We're very transparent about that, and we're trying to bring them in a perspective that they understand in which they can relate. So to be clear, though, the focus on risk isn't about removing the humanity of the situation, but responding to the evolving landscape, with respect to how organizations are expected to behave with mental illness in the workplace and what our duties of care are. We really want them to own that. It's a new day, and we all have to be better equipped to address these complex tasks at work. So we focus on mental health. We focus on mental illness. It's a larger well-being strategy. And along with that, leaders are encouraged to incorporate into their leader role an emphasis on this, as well as to model appropriate health behavior to include attending to the establishment and practice of emotional well-being behavior and reinforce it through the ranks. So in essence, by appealing to their sense of leadership responsibility, we create real subtle connections to personal health behavior in themselves, but by extension to their colleagues and staff, but again, in a way that's not provocative, threatening, provoking defensiveness. It's in a very relatable way, and it's part of their leadership accountability.
Great. Well, thanks, panel. Right now, what we're going to do is open it up to the audience to see what questions you have for our panel. While they've been talking, we do have a question that did come in with how do you find a provider for an executive-focused program? From the panel, who would like to kind of talk through ways that you can find a program that would be focused on executives?
Yeah. Jamie, is the question, how do you find a specific provider for an executive?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Or like a vendor, like how do you find, how does one find a program that's focused on executives?
Well, look no further. We have one here. I think you just have to know, you have to do a proper assessment of your own organization, know what your needs are, and do some research in the market about what types of providers can, like I said, be nimble enough and flexible enough and willing to tailor things to meet your specific nuanced needs.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of industry emphasis on this, even though we know leaders are underserved, we know that they're targeted, we know that they have the same mental illness issues that anybody else has. It's been a sticky wicket, and really what I see in the market is everybody just calls a 1-800 number, and there's no distinction in frame of reference, and that didn't work for us. We had very specific needs along the spectrum that we needed to attend to, and we had to go out and ask for it, and we had to build it in collaboration with. I don't think it's just a thing that every vendor has.
It's definitely more of a consultative process, I think, than something that you're just taking off the shelf, I'd say.
Yeah, indeed. And part of what we've been talking about today has been, understanding the culture. And I'm going to give a concrete example. And it wasn't like this was exactly like defining to our program and our work with Deloitte. Although, Deborah, now you planted Deloitte in my brain, and I keep wanting to say that, so I'm going to try not to. Thank you for that. But when we started working with them, and Amanda and Deborah started consulting and kind of understanding and doing all kinds of early discovery, if you will, Deborah would talk about how they had a program. I don't even know if it still exists, but a program at Deloitte that they called the Corporate Athlete. And it was a supportive program, and it was a program about how people adapt and grow and embrace their managerial skill set and continue to kind of expand their skill set in a way that's win-win. It's win for the executive, and it's win for the company, right? But the fact that they chose the image of a corporate athlete was very telling. And what it told us early on is if we come in with a perspective of we're all just going to sit around on yoga mats and hug each other and hold hands, and I know it's a very extreme example, but I'm saying it for dramatic effect, that's not going to play well into that particular environment, right? And so understanding the culture and the images and the metaphors that they use to kind of support and bring forth excellence in their work and in their job and in their balance of their work-life balance, those are really important things if you're going to try to tap into a culture and really help move that forward and understand the client. So I just wanted to give a quick example of that.
Okay. We don't have any other questions at this time. So with that, we'll go to just a quick little wrap up here. So optimized leaders propel high-performance organizations. By attending today, you've taken yet another step to helping your executives and key leaders to thrive. So just wanted to thank our panel and our audience for your time today. And a special thank you to Dr. Deborah Miscoll. Deborah, your innovation and behavioral health initiatives and your commitment to the executives at your firm is admirable. And I appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with our audience. And for our audience, thank you for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.